Denuclearization will be the focus of the conversation when President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un meet in Singapore. That has some critics fearing that the president may avoid raising the Kim regime's long history of human rights abuses, which, according to the State Department, include extrajudicial killings, disappearances, arbitrary arrests and detentions, and political prison camps. CBS News State Department reporter Kylie Atwood is following this. She is traveling with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and joins us now from Singapore. Kylie, the central issue at hand here during this summit is, of course, North Korea's nuclear program. But explain the Kim regime's history with human rights abuses.
Right. So, Meg, bluntly put, North Korea is one of the most horrendous abusers of human rights in the world. A recent State Department report put out just this year said that North Koreans face egregious human rights violations by the government in nearly all reporting categories. That's pretty incredible that the U.S. is not bringing this up at this point. And what do those egregious human rights abuses actually look like? There are hundreds of North Korean prison camps in the country, and some human rights groups say that there could be close to 200,000 North Koreans who are in those camps. They are subject to hard labor, they face starvation, they are forced to eat things like frogs, rodents, and snakes in order to survive. And how do they get there? Well, basically, if they show any sign of being opposed to the regime, then they could be subject to being sent to one of these prison camps. I also want to point out that there are public detentions and public killings in North Korea. There were said to be more than 3,000 public executions in the country from 2012 to 2016. And obviously, Kim Jong Un, who is sitting down with President Trump tomorrow, is thought to be one of the people who ordered the assassination of his own half-brother in 2017.
Kylie, Republican Senator Orrin Hatch argued, quote, to achieve lasting peace in the region, we must demand that North Korea not only surrender its nuclear weapons, it must also cease its human rights abuses. So with everything that you just brought up, do you expect President Trump to bring up this issue with Kim Jong Un?
Well, based on the briefing that we just got here in Singapore from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he was previewing what Trump is going to talk about and look for in the sit-down first face-to-face meeting between Trump and Kim tomorrow. Human rights wasn't mentioned one time, so that's a pretty good indicator that he doesn't plan to focus on it a whole lot. Now, we know that President Trump has committed to Japan, that he will bring up the issue of Japanese abductees. And that is an issue that the Japanese have been really focused on. The government says that there are at least a dozen Japanese nationals that were abducted by North Korea in the 1970s and 1980s. And they don't view the U.S. necessarily being in a position to further U.S.-North Korea talks if this issue isn't resolved. But even though Trump has said he'll mention that, it doesn't mean that he's going to mention human rights on a whole. And it's not just these detention camps. It's not just these public assassinations. The whole political system in North Korea is a sham. In 2015, there were elections, and 100% of the voters are said to have voted for the regime, which obviously demonstrates that the political system is not allowing any sort of opposition at all.
Kylie, South Korean President Moon Jae-in has also carefully sidestepped rights issues in his two face-to-face meetings with Kim Jong Un. Explain the strategy there.
Right. So President Moon is someone who views himself as the facilitator in these U.S.-North Korea talks. He doesn't want to put things on the table that are going to push these two countries further apart. And he is actually now saying that he is supportive of development agencies and aid humanitarian groups going into North Korea. Obviously, that's going to support the people who are facing these human rights abuses, but it's not necessarily holding the regime accountable for carrying out those human rights abuses or saying that because of those abuses, they can't enter into conversations with world powers like the U.S. and like South Korea. So if this conversation about human rights isn't on the table at the forefront with President Moon or with President Trump, a lot of critics are saying, when is human rights ever going to be an issue that the U.S. is going to press in conversations, potential future conversations with North Korea?
All right, well, we'll have to wait and see. Kylie Atwood in Singapore for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg.